Hello, my name's Ed Love, and I've been involved with various types of music here in Nebraska for over 50 years. It's my pleasure to lead this discussion today. We've assembled a panel of veteran musicians and teachers that have been involved with mostly classical music in the area for a long time. And we hope that our discussion sheds some light on the rich history of music here in Lincoln and this part of the state. So just to get us started, would you please identify yourself and just say a little bit about why it is you're here?
Well, I'm Patricia Morrow. I'm a violist with the Lincoln Symphony. I've played with other orchestras in the area. I played with Omaha and I played in Tulsa. I'm primarily a performer. I've done some teaching out in New York, but I haven't really done any here in Lincoln.
I'm Aleta Collier. I'm a violin, viola person, both teaching and playing over many, many years. From 1946, when I was first in Lincoln Symphony.
Moving right along.
I'm Vernon Forbes. I'm a trombonist, and that's the instrument I taught at the University of Nebraska for 35 years, and was a member of the Lincoln Symphony all the time that I was teaching at the University of Nebraska, plus some other years before that.
My name is Richard Jones. I'm timpani percussion. I recently retired from Omaha Symphony, but I still play timpani in the Lincoln Symphony Orchestra. And I also teach at Nebraska Wesleyan University.
Seems maybe Aleta got in the symphony before some of the rest of us did. Tell us more about that.
Well, I'll back up considerably.
Okay.
I come from several generations of Wisconsin dairy farmers who all played the violin, plus 3 great aunts who taught violin and enough other instruments that they had a town band in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. My grandfather and father attempted dairy farming in Missouri during the Great Depression. They lost it, and my father got into the Postal Service. When I was 7, members of the Kansas City Philharmonic started a teaching program where they would give a child free a small violin with paying for the lessons. So from age 7 till I was about 10, I studied with the assistant concertmaster of the Kansas City Philharmonic. Then we moved to Lincoln because my father had heard about a marvelous violin professor named Emanuel Wishnow at the university here. When we got here, we found that Emanuel was not taking non-university age people. So I studied with graduate students of his for a while. And then I studied with Carl Frederick Steckelberg, who had been Wishnow's predecessor way before the School of Music was part of the university. Then, as I was studying with Emanuel as a freshman, he put me and another student of his as the back stand of the first violins in Lincoln Symphony. This was 1946, so that's from when I was in the symphony.
Go over here for a sec. Vernon, why the heck did you get started in the music business? What was your inspiration? Was there a particular person or a musician that pushed you that direction, or allowed you to go that direction?
Well, it sounds like my story is a little like Aleta's, in that music was in my family. My father was a music teacher, and actually he was also in the symphony. He was a charter member of the orchestra. I think that was way back in 1928. And so, and he gave music lessons in the home. I can remember students coming through and going to the parlor, and then most of them were trumpet players. He was a trumpet player. And then I took up the trombone when I was going into 7th grade. He needed trombones for his band, and so that's how I became a trombonist. And I studied out of a famous book for brass players, The Arbin Method, and I would play an etude and I'd say, oh, there's that one, because I had heard it over and over and over through all these music lessons. So kind of like through osmosis, I picked up a lot of the music business that way. And because at that time, while I was in grade school, my father was still playing in the symphony, and I think this would have been before Aleta joined, when I was in grade school, that I would follow along with him for some of the rehearsals. I'd go to the rehearsal of the Lincoln Symphony. And I'm sorry, I'm not very conversant with the restaurant that it used to be Crane River. And then did it become Misty's? Mm-hmm. Okay, well above that, on the second floor, is where the Chamber of Commerce had the quarters. And they had a large enough room there that's where the symphony rehearsed at that time. And so I attended some of those rehearsals, even when I was in grade school and before I was playing the trombone. And then naturally, you know, the orchestra played concerts, and I would attend some of those concerts, which at that time were held at St. Paul Methodist Church. And I can remember being up in the balcony and maybe not sitting in my seat all the time, but the balcony was pretty empty at that time. Everybody was sitting in the first floor, and the balcony was fairly empty. But I went to the concerts that way. And my father was also a member of the Lincoln City Band. So naturally we went to those concerts in those days. And I can recall that I passed out programs. I don't know if they have programs now or not, but there was a long period of time they didn't. And but they had programs then, and I would pass out programs to the members of the audience. And then, like Aleta, I joined the orchestra a long time ago. I think, let's see, I was in 10th grade, so that would probably be like 1947. So probably a year after you.
Just about a year.
And
you were in the Lincoln Symphony in 10th grade?
Yes.
A prodigy, a veritable prodigy.
Yes. Well, we've had some other high school students in over the years. I would say, I hate to insult anybody, but I would say one of the most notable ones was Mark Johnson, who really was a very fine cellist. And I think he was a member when he was in high school. And so, and in those days, in high school, I was playing what is known as bass trombone. So they put me on bass trombone. And so my career started then. Actually, about that same time, music in high schools did not include jazz or big band music. It was frowned upon. But a number of us in high school formed a band, and it was students at Northeast, that's where I went to school, as well as Lincoln High. And we called ourselves the Minor Riffs, which is the name of a tune that Stan Kenton had, one of his famous tunes in those days. And we were all aficionados of Stan Kenton, so we chose that name. And we played for dances like at the Alt Pavilion in Antelope Park, teen time dances. And then in the 11th grade, I actually joined the Musicians Union. That was non-union. Mm-hmm. And we did get paid. But in the 11th grade, I joined the union and played in a dance band. And the front of that was Gaylord Feistner.
When you were in the symphony as such a young person, did you get paid?
Oh no.
How about you? Were you paid as a university student in the back of the fiddle section?
At first, I was not going to be, but something changed right then, and I was paid.
Do you remember how much?
No.
Well, maybe this is from the 60s, but I remember the going rate in the 60s was $1 an hour for the rehearsals. And I can't remember exactly what the pay was for the concerts, but I think it was like $10.
Sounds about right. When I got in the symphony in the mid-70s, they began with $3.50 an hour and $15 per concert. So that's
Okay.
about right. So there was some pay raise.
It had gone up a little bit.
Yeah.
That was before the union, helped us form a collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got in the symphony, I think it was 1971, and shortly after that I remember discussions about should we ask for more money for rehearsals? Should we go from $2 an hour to $2.50 or whatever it was? And oh my gosh, it was so stressful.
I don't want to let it go, but your father was my then junior high orchestra
Yes.
conductor. And my first job in Scotts Bluff, he was my boss out there. I went
That's
out as a
right.
string specialist.
That's right.
Right out of school. And he was...
What was your first year out there?
It would have been,
Would it be 48 or 49?
well, let's see,
49 was his first
50.
year.
I graduated in 50 from the university.
Oh, that's
So it would
right.
have been the fall of 50.
Okay, so you came after I had graduated. I graduated out there in 1950. So you
Okay,
came
it's just
after
right
that.
here.
Pat, when did you get in the orchestra?
68.
68.
Yeah, we moved here from Rochester in 68, and both Robert and I played. He played horn. He was actually a trumpet player, but he came in and the trumpets were in mass at the time, and so he ended up playing horn, which is his second instrument. And so he was teaching out at Wesley and doing that, and by then I had switched to viola, so I was playing from about that time.
Anything to add over here about that sort of
My
thing?
stories aren't nearly as colorful as these. I got here in '71 during Vietnam War, and I didn't want to go over there and fight, so I decided to become a student and studied music. And actually, I came here on to study classic literature, Greek and Latin, because I found that interesting. But the St. Louis Symphony was in residency in those days and had a great impact on me, and so I thought, wow, that looks like fun. I bet I can do that. So took some classes in the music department, started playing extra in the symphony, and the rest is history.
Yeah. What were some of the most prominent or influential musicians around? I mean, you've mentioned Emanuel Wishnow already, and another violin teacher who had a long name that I've already forgotten.
Lou Trzynski?
Pardon me?
Lou Trzynski?
Lou Trzynski.
Oh, yes, he
viola,
was on the
yes.
faculty here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Any others that
Well, for
were
me,
inspiring?
there were three, Buddy Meal, Arnold Schatz, and Jack R. Snyder. I mean, they helped me form who I am today. Bud, mostly because he was aggressive, and he kind of...
He was one of the former conductors of the orchestra.
And again, I think if I remember, he was the one that brought the collective bargaining agreement to the symphony. He came from San Diego and decided, well, we need to turn this into an orchestra. So he started putting more demands on us, and then Arnold Schatz, who created the Nebraska Chamber Orchestra. I was fortunate enough to get in on the ground floor with that and really honed my playing skills from doing church gigs and parking lot gigs and any kind of gig we could find. And then Jack R. Snyder, who was the director of bands at that time. I remember when I arrived, the marching band was a big thing. And I was not a fan of marching band anymore. I'd outgrown that in high school, but it was kind of a requirement that if you're a percussionist, you're going to play in the marching band. And I thought, how can I get around it? So I spoke to Jack, and he said, Jones, I'll let you go, but you got to play anytime I need you for something. And so I said, fine. And that's what happened. One day, and there was a brass choir. I need a timpani today, Jones, get in there. So he just put me in, and I thank him for that because he just made the call, and I was there. It taught me a lot. So those three people. in
Leo
particular?
Kopp was the conductor when I first came.
When I first joined, it was still Leo. He was on his way out.
And that was an interesting experience with him because everything, you played music
Right.
that no matter where you had been before playing in a traditional orchestra, he picked something that was harder and more elaborate and much more difficult than you had played before. It wasn't necessarily a good performance, but it was an enthusiastic performance.
You have many more sheets of paper here.
Well, mentioning Arnold Schatz and the Nebraska Chamber Orchestra, the dates of that, 1976 to 93, Maureen, my husband and I were both charter members of that too. Wonderful experience.
I think he formed it in '74 as a pickup orchestra, and then
Yeah, there
actually
was,
incorporated or whatever.
He had a chamber, Arnold had a chamber music.
Before
group.
Emil came.
Right, correct.
There was the Sheldon when it started out. It
Yeah.
was kind of a part of an early version of the Friends of Chamber Music, I suppose you'd call it.
I think he started, if I remember correctly, Jack Levick, who was the director of music at Auden Music then, was doing the Vivaldi Gloria, and he needed to hire a
That
string
was
group.
right afterward.
Yeah, and so Arnold thought, hey, there might be a market for this. So, and there was.
Well, and then Arnold Schatz and Robert Emil, the conductor of the orchestra, had this long-standing feud, and
And there was one time, for a short time, we had 3 orchestras in Lincoln, Nebraska. Lincoln Symphony Orchestra, Nebraska Chamber Orchestra, and then the Lincoln's Little Symphony. Right, because Bud couldn't control Arnold and the chamber orchestra, so he started his own little band.
I recall that.
yeah, I was the personnel manager for the orchestra right when that feud came to a head, and I had to call Arnold Schatz on the phone and inform him that if he was late or missed one more rehearsal, that he would be in jeopardy of losing his position as concertmaster. And he sort of chuckled and thanked me for doing the job that I had to do, and then that's pretty much when the chamber orchestra got started. Yeah,
And then we were all there when Arnold walked out. I do believe. we were all
Yes.
there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep. Goodbye.
I recall.
I've had enough.
The case closed.
Right.
The violin case closed. Out he went.
Right, quiet. No words were spoken, and it was just total dead silence.
Oh,
Everybody was
yeah.
Did that just happen? You know?
The door closed and everybody looked at each other.
Yeah. Fortunately, nothing like that has happened since, I don't think.
No.
I haven't been in the orchestra for a few years. Well, another thing that happened with the orchestra that spawned yet another musical group, the Nebraska Chamber Players, is when the orchestra was having financial problems and they decided to only do pieces that used woodwinds in pairs instead of threes, and so the third chair chamber players were formed.
That's how that name came around.
Right.
Yeah, Becky Van de Bogart and Karen Sandine were playing the third woodwind, third flute, third bassoon, whatever, so that's where that came up. And that group is still functioning. It's now the Nebraska Chamber
Nebraska
Players.
Chamber Players.
Everybody's name changes, I guess, along the way. It's easier
Puts
to get,
Nebraska.
well, it's easier to get grants from the
Correct.
Nebraska Arts Council, I guess, if you, well, whatever.
Well, I had a few different names on my list,
Okay,
and most of them were from the 40s, perhaps. Obviously, Emanuel Wishna, he was a very good violinist. He was the concertmaster of the orchestra during that time, and he was a conductor at the University Orchestra. John Chilnick was the principal trumpet in the symphony, and he was a very fine trumpet player. I admired his playing right from the very start. I thought he is the essence of a classical trumpet player. And later on, I found out when he was in the service during World War II, he played in a band in New York, perhaps New York City. And one of the other trumpet players was turned out to be the principal trumpet at the New York Philharmonic. And so he and John were in pretty good company there. There was a horn player by the name of Luther Andrews, who was instrumental in the music scene all the way through the probably 20s and 30s, and I knew of him in the 40s. He was an advertising executive But obviously, music was very important to his life because he did a lot of it. And he was the principal horn. Mark Pierce, of course, was the principal bassist at that time.
And Mark Pierce fixed everybody's violin
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
beautifully.
Yes. Very good craftsman. And besides that, then, I would include some other people who weren't in the symphony, like Myron Roberts. Myron Roberts is an excellent organist, teacher, and composer. As a matter of fact, when I went to Indiana University and I went to an organ recital there, I looked at the program and there was Myron's name. And I thought, I know who he is. You know, I didn't know him personally, but of course my sister was a student here at the university, and we knew of Myron. I'd include another name, although he was not maybe a leading musician. His name was Curtis Elliott, and he played clarinet. But he was principally known in town because he was a very well-known professor of insurance at the university. And he was of the old school, and he wrapped his string around his reed.
Oh. No ligatures.
No ligature.
Did they call him Doc? I've heard of
Yes.
Doc Elliott. Doc Elliott.
Yes.
I've heard, okay. I never did hear his real first name.
And I do not have a name for this individual. Maybe Aleta knows of him. But I know at least in the 30s, I don't think it existed in the 40s, there was a choir called the Lincoln Cathedral Choir. And a number of very important people were in that choir. It was not, as I recall, it was not associated with any one church, but they performed at churches. For instance, Tom Pansing was in that. Lulabelle, his wife, was in that. My aunt, when she came to school from Culbertson, she sang in that choir. It must have been really something. And what I'm saying is that he added to the environment, musical environment in Lincoln. Obviously, Arthur Westbrook, a man who then became head of the department after Arthur, David Foltz, and I had to have to add Beth Miller. Now you notice I didn't say Beth Miller Herod, because I knew her name as Beth Miller in the 1940s, and that's before she got married. And she, even in that time, she had a very well-known and highly respected piano studio that continued all the way through the 60s.
70s
And yeah,
Haist. She was at Wesleyan.
She
Right.
produced a lot of solos for the symphony.
a lot. I mean, she and Carol Work. Carol's teaching was just unbelievable. And she had student after student that won auditions and became soloists for the symphony.
She also had Rocky Ridge Music Festival.
Yes, yes,
Carol Work was a cellist. Saying that to our video audience.
that's right.
Who would maybe not know that.
And Beth Miller founded Rocky Ridge Music Camp
Yes,
at Estes Park.
When I came, Carol Work and Aleta and her husband Lori and Ruth
Johnson.
those were the primary people that if you wanted to be a string person, those are the ones you went to see.
absolutely.
And they were the Lincoln Quartet.
They
The
were
Lincoln String Quartet.
And then Wesleyan started having a few people out there, but that was a little later on, I believe. That wouldn't have been right when I came. Marshalls, I think were there.
Janet Marshall.
Janet Marshall.
And Bob Marshall was
Yeah.
band
Band.
out there.
Oh, it wasn't it.
Yes.
And Kerry Lewis and his wife, Dorothy, came shortly after we were here. And they formed a trio, which was actually did quite a bit performing outside
that's
of
right.
Lincoln.
But you mentioned Myron Roberts. I forgot about Myron Roberts. I took 2 classes from Myron, music appreciation and music theory, and I'll never forget. He's very mild-mannered, very quiet, never really got excited. And I don't know what it was that it clicked. I thought, wow, music, that could be a real career. But he said, remember this, you have to work a little and you have to play a little. He always wanted that balance. He didn't want you to overwork. But I do think that was one of the reasons I got into music, was because of the way he presented it to me. It was sort of a foreign language, classical music, and he made it easy to understand and with open arms. So thank you for bringing his name up.
Yeah.
There's a legend about him and the old music building, which was over here.
Right here.
Right here.
Right, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
That's
where
right.
the lead center is.
There was an organ built in to a small recital hall in the lower level. It got worse and worse over time, and it was said that Myron Roberts would stop playing, disappear into the bowels of the organ, yank out a pipe or two, and throw it on the floor and resume the lesson. The organ had fewer and fewer pipes.
Wasn't the organ studio on the first floor as you came in the stairs and went directly south? It was a little bit to the right. Just
Yeah.
the right of the stairways going up to the second and third floor. I recall that.
Well, and you spent some time in the old music building.
Yes.
Yeah. Teaching.
Let's see, when did we build the new building? Was that
66.
66, 67? I came in 1961. But I have to mention, you know, not just the university, but Aleta's here, and she mentioned that my father was the music teacher at Irving Junior High, and I would go to his concerts, obviously when I was in grade school, and later on in the 40s, he became the director at the new high school, Northeast High School at the time, and so his duties were greatly expanded. That's the time he dropped out of the symphony, but I knew of, not being a trombone player yet, I knew of 3 violinists who were very accomplished at that time. One of them, of course, was Aleta. Another was my sister, who I think was a year younger than you.
We were twins by birth date.
Oh, really? You were the two of you were in the same class? Oh, well, not the same year?
You know, I'm foggy on that.
I thought, well, anyway, she graduated from college in 51, and she graduated from high school in 47.
Yeah, 1 year later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the other one was, you know, this getting old is really something.
What's your name, Vernon?
We should have done this a week ago, but you were sick.
That's
so
right.
It would have been better then, right?
At least we played Murder in the Dark with her. That was her name for it. The Forbeses and the Getmans, Getman.
Sylvia?
Sylvia Getman. So I knew
Yes.
Sylvia Getman, Aleta Collier, and I was, what, 5th grade? And I've known of, I didn't know Aleta then for sure, but I knew of her ever since then because she was an outstanding violinist over at Irving.
What's Murder in the Dark?
Murder in the
Sounds-
Dark is
sounds
like,
exciting.
is very much the same as It. We're going to play It. And somebody has to hide, and they're It, and then you try to go find
Oh,
it. Well, the Getmans and the Forbeses would get together he was a English professor at the university, and the Forbeses and the Getmans would get together and have dinners. And of course, the 2 daughters played violin. My father picked up the viola. My mother played cello. And after dinner, they played string quartets. And I sat and listened as long as Royal Getman would listen and his wife. and we played Murder in the Dark in their basement. So, you know, turn off all the lights, and that's the dark.
Maybe we should stop at that point
Yeah.
before.
She eventually went to Juilliard, and I visited her when I was a student at Indiana. I went up to Cleveland, and I met her and her husband. And her husband was an oboist, and he was in the Cleveland Symphony. And she said, oh yes, when we met, he was playing the garbage can circuit when we were in Juilliard, which meant like the Brooklyn Philharmonic and the Newark Philharmonic. He was playing in all those little orchestras around New York City. And his first gig was the Cleveland Symphony. Second oboist.
Not bad.
And his name was Gatwood, and he eventually became the principal oboist of the
Cleveland.
not Cleveland, Western Pennsylvania, Steeltown. Pittsburgh.
Ah.
And I think when Eric, the clarinetist, came here, Ginsberg, he knew the Sylvia's children, who also was a very fine oboist.
Okay.
And it was amazing.
Well, you all have done a lot of teaching here over the years. Have any of your students gone on to wonderful and amazing things as far as professional gigs are concerned?
Well, interesting things. Maury and I both have students spread all over the country, not having kept track of all of them, but playing in various orchestras and teaching. The Cole sisters, Gay and April, were both students of mine. Gay taught here and then went to, I think it's Pennsylvania. She's been teaching I think she's not teaching now. And April's gone way west, still teaching. Right here, I have a recent graduate who's with her husband now, as a member of the Wildwoods country music group. She still plays for various things at the cathedral, but she's a very, very good violinist. Her husband's a very nice, good composer. He composed something for their wedding that was really beautiful with chorus and organ. And so she covers both worlds this way in doing, well, I guess it's bluegrass. And
Do you remember where is the Wildwood?
the Wildwoods is their name of this
That's a
little
band.
group.
Yes, where is it located?
Here in Lincoln.
Here in Lincoln.
Yeah, they're playing at Stransky Park, I noticed, soon this summer sometime.
Didn't they have a brother,
Yes.
was it Jerry Cole? He was a composer.
Oh, you're doing Coles now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I skipped, yeah.
Yes, they did.
I knew him more, I was aware of them, they played in the orchestra, but I knew him a little better.
And he also kind of supervised us early music group. Priscilla Parson was in that, and a few other people
Yeah.
played recorders in that.
Our Lincoln String Quartet was the first group to play at the Sheldon Gallery, and we played for a reception below here at, I think we were the first string quartet to play in the Lead Center, too. At that time, we were the main string quartet. What's great is since now there are a bunch of them.
Yes. That's really nice.
Yeah, the Lincoln's music scene has grown quite a bit, fortunately. What else have you noticed that's changed over the years as far as other groups springing up? Have anything come to mind?
Well, I've been out of it so long. I've been retired. We see it's going to be 23 years now, and that's almost half of a person's career.
Well, there certainly are a lot of string groups, like you mentioned, and,
Yes.
and the
Plethora of string quartets
Yes.
and brass quintets, Nebraska Brass, Plymouth Brass,
Yes.
Odyssey Brass from around here. There's quite a few of those.
Back in the day, were there brass groups hired at churches when you were?
The brass group that started it all was Jack Levick started the Plymouth Brass. And before that, I really don't recall any brass work. And actually, the whole concept of a brass quintet compared to a string quartet is very, very new. I think the very first appearance of a brass quintet was probably sometime in the 1950s. And it was formed by musicians in New York City called the New York Brass Quintet. And don't ask me for any names, but we had them here at Sheldon Gallery on one of our chamber music concerts. I think Lincoln Friends of Chamber Music. And so before that, there had been brass music written, but it might have been a sextet, it might have been a septet, a trio. It was not an organized number of instruments and certain types of instruments. And for a while there was even two types of brass quintets, one of them with the bass trombone being the lowest instrument and the other with the tuba being the lowest instrument. And that the tuba one is the one that remains. I think there could be still another bass trombone brass quintet, but they're pretty rare.
When I was growing up in Grand Island, the high school director was very much into the idea of groups, and that's probably what got me into music. And,
who was that?
Grenier.
I didn't know him.
He would encourage group. I mean, he had brass groups, he had wind groups, he had 2 string quartets going when I was in high school. And then my violin teacher, who had the Conservatory of Music in Grand Island, I started when I was 10. I started going down there, and what was interesting is that she had this setup that, you would have your normal lessons, and then on weekends, you could go down and play quartets or duets or anything, and she would sponsor whatever it was. And then she had a little orchestra called a Little Symphony Orchestra.
What was her name?
Miss Jane Pinder.
Pinder?
Pinder, P-I-N-D-E-R. She was up from out east, from Cleveland. And she had started this, and when I knew her, seemed like she was ancient. But
Was the Tri-City Symphony going at the time you were in Grand Island?
it was later, yeah. It was just starting when I was leaving.
Was Larry Maupin,
Yes.
was he kind of like the organizer of that?
Yes, yes.
I recall him playing in the symphony when he was a student at Westmead. He really did a great thing.
He took over from Grenier, after when Grenier was finishing up his stint at, his teaching.
Okay.
Larry kind of took over at that point.
Is there still, I know there's a Hastings Symphony Orchestra. Is there still what'd you say, Tri-Cities?
Tri-City.
Tri-City.
It was Hastings, Grand
Kearney.
Island, and Kearney.
So does that group still exist? Does
I
anybody
don't
know?
know.
Okay. Well, at least the Hastings Symphony is still going. Maybe
Yeah.
they just sort of took it over.
Well, Hastings, I think, there was a Hastings Symphony, I think, in the 30s. And they used to charge a dime for the concerts.
It was known as the Dime Symphony.
They also paid their players, because I got paid when I was in high school. I went over there and played. And then my teacher was always trying to get us to play for things, and so a lot of the women's clubs there would hire musicians. And so I did a lot of solo work when I was in high school.
And I remember that I think it was a man by the name of Matt Shoemaker.
Yes.
Who was instrumental with the Hastings Symphony.
Yes.
He's the one that's founded the Dime Symphony.
So that was your first paying.
That was my first my first paying job was an organ job. I was organist for the Episcopal Church in Grand Island when I was in
heaven's
high
sake.
school.
Ta-da.
The double threat.
Good for you. How much did that pay? Do you remember?
I have no idea.
And a loaf of bread was a quarter, whatever.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And you said that eventually you got paid for playing in the Lincoln Symphony Orchestra. Did you get paid for gigs prior to that in other situations? Or?
No, that was the first thing I was paid for. But I think it was just one semester when I was not paid, and then it changed.
Aleta, at the time, of, say like you were in college, 40s and well, of course, you left Lincoln to go to Scottsbluff after you graduated, but were you aware of like string quartets in town?
No.
I don't recall any either. It seemed like there was just a symphony, there was the Lincoln City Band, and things like that.
I remember going to concerts with my parents of the band and the symphony. At the Stewart Theater, when the symphony was playing there, there was a most interesting orchestra pit.
Yes.
It was controlled by a very elaborate podium, which I think is maybe still down there in the bowels of the theater. It had all kinds of push buttons, which caused the stage to come up, the orchestra pit to come up as part of the stage. Eugene List was once a soloist, piano soloist. The piano, Leo Kopp and his podium, cellos, all the first violins except myself and my stand partner. We were at the edge of the real stage. Our music stand was on a board on a brick across the footlights. And the thing balked. It wouldn't come up for this dress rehearsal. So Eugene List was cheerily waving up from the pit, and my stand partner and I looked like we were the first violins.
Yeah.
Do you remember playing the Nutcracker in that pit when it divided itself again?
Not in the Stewart. I don't recall playing the Nutcracker in the Stewart.
We did. We played it in the Stewart, and the pit divided in the performance. Somebody hit a button, and the percussion, the timpani, went up, and the rest of the orchestra was down.
That's the way it should be.
Quote the timpani.
Well, I had kind of a theory, I don't know whether it's borne out in fact, that one reason there was quite an environment in Lincoln for music was that I remember my parents telling me that Lincoln had a lot of movie theaters for its size. And I can't remember the name of the movie critic, but there was a movie critic in town who got to review lots of movies because we had lots of theaters. But before that, we had the silent theaters. And in the silent theaters, you had to have a little orchestra. So there were, I presume there were lots of silent movie theaters for a town this size. And there were all these little groups playing in the silent movies. My father was doing that as well. And these musicians decided they wanted to play some real music. And that's how the Lincoln Symphony was formed, is that certain members from various movie houses got together and formed what they called the Lincoln Little Symphony. That was the first orchestra. And because we had all those people who were performing and active, and also because we had the Music Conservatory, Willard Kimball's, actually the name of it was the University School of Music. When I was in school, grade school, I just assumed that meant University of Nebraska. My father could have told me different, but we didn't talk about that. But it was a private conservatory with that name. And obviously they hired professors or teachers. And a lot of them were active performers. And they could perform in Lincoln. And of course, the fact that was there would bring students. And a lot of those students would stay in town after they graduated. That type of thing still happens. A lot of people come from outstate of Nebraska. They graduate, they stay here in Lincoln. And I think the same thing is true about an audience. The fact that we have an audience that wants to hear music. We have the University of Nebraska here, and it's bringing all kinds of people who want education or who are already educated, like professors or students who stay in town. They want music. And I think the opportunity was here. We had people that could play. We had people that wanted to hear music. And so Lincoln was very fortunate, at least that's the way I see it, in that regard, that that the music scene could be as productive as it has become.
So when did the conservatory become part of the University of Nebraska?
I don't know an exact date, but it was before 1935. It was somewhere between 32 and 35, as far as I can tell. And the university, before that, they had the private conservatory, which was across the street from the university, and they taught all the applied courses. And then there were teachers on the university faculty who taught academic classes like music history, music theory. Who was the great music theory teacher?
Elizabeth Tierney.
Elizabeth Tierney. Elizabeth Tierney, perhaps, I don't know whether, well, no, Myron wouldn't have been here at the time that it was a conservatory, but Elizabeth Tierney was, and she was hired by the university to teach an academic course, but everything else came from the School of Music. So the university decided we're going to have a music department. We're going to buy the University School of Music. Well, they had maybe a half a dozen, 7 or 8 vocal teachers. They had 4, 5, 6 piano teachers. Maybe they just had 3 or 4 students, but they were teaching at the University School of Music. And they hired a man to be the head of the department. He came from Illinois Wesleyan, and his name was Arthur Westbrook. And Arthur Westbrook's job was to hire a full-time faculty. So the backside of that was he had to fire lots of people. There was, through the 30s and 40s, I think by the time the 50s, well, pretty much Westbrook was retired by that time, the animosity was quite diminished. But there was a lot of animosity between these people who had taught on the university, the conservatory, and were fired by Westbrook. They hated him. Oh, Arthur Westbrook, they had nothing to do with him. But he hired permanent vocal teachers, piano teachers, and so on and so forth.
So what was happening in the 40s and 50s?
Well, the 40s, that's when Aleta was here. That's when my sister was a student. The music department was rather small. I remember when I came in 1961, I would say the number of students was maybe a little larger than it was in the 40s, maybe not, but it was about 145 students, which is very small compared to what it is now. I don't know what the number is now, but it's several hundred. And so it was, the music department just kind of went along, and I can recall, because my parents were music teachers and graduates of the university in music, they kept track of what the music department was doing, and they would say, oh yes, the music department is going to get a new building, because they were housed in this old conservatory of music, which was really, all those practice rooms on the top floor were designed as living rooms. There was a bed in them, and a piano, and a student paid rent for their room. They could practice in their own bedroom. And of course, when we were teaching in there was no bed anymore. They were just practice rooms then. But when we destroyed that building, Emanuel Wishnow found a prospectus of the School of Music in, say, like 1896. and they talked about the room. They had photographs of the rooms on the third floor.
I think Carl Steckelberg was the string person there who was fired. I'm not, I don't have it in print, but I think there was no loss there, as I sensed it when I was studying with Steckelberg when I was in high school at his home.
And Emanuel Wishnow was hired instead of Steckelberg.
But Steckelberg was the first concert master of the Lincoln Little Symphony. There are pictures.
Yes, that would have been before Emanuel's time. I don't know when he would have graduated from high school, but I think he was just more or less out of college by the time he was hired to be a professor for the school Department of Music at the university, or recently out.
When I would have started in 1946, there was a pretty good-sized string class there, string students. Emanuel had quite a few very good. One gathering at the opening of school one year, everyone was supposed to stand up and introduce themselves. And one memorable moment was when a girl stood up, "My name is Patricia Lyon. I'm a violin music major from Broken Bow."
Broken Bow.
Ba-doom-tsh. Bucket of fish.
Did the Lincoln Symphony bring in well-known guest artists back when
Well,
Yeah,
first
well,
started?
Eugene
When is
List.
when?
Well,
yes.
Yeah.
In the 40s, actually the Lincoln Symphony series was going and had been going like that for a few years. But the Lincoln Symphony sold tickets for their subscription. And on the year subscription were 4 orchestra concerts and 2 solo recitals.
Segovia guitar was one. I remember
was he?
seeing him playing on the stage of the Stewart.
Well, I was told that it got started like that because, first of all, the Lincoln Little Symphony started by the musicians, and somehow they sold tickets to their concert. And then I believe they went to an arts group that had outside soloists coming in and said, "Could we join you, and would you sell the tickets and do all that kind of thing?"
Was that the community concert series that was connected, or is that a completely different
That was
setup?
completely different.
Yeah.
So that was an inner.
Yeah, and so they started doing that, and so that's how they had this. The orchestra would be doing this, and then there would be 2 solo concerts. And I can't recall when that changed. And it might have been going still in the 60s when I came back. I don't think we played, like a full season of subscription concerts only. I think there were outside soloists that came in, usually a pianist, or maybe a violinist with a pianist, accompanist.
Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about the community concert series.
Yes.
It was going when I came here. It wasn't going for very much longer, actually, because it kind of dissipated.
Some were at the Coliseum.
Oh, yes.
I remember seeing Aida, stone temples, people
Me too.
singing at the top of their lungs while they were suffocating in a temple, sealed in a temple. And then a draft came by and the stone walls of the temple were rippling.
Oh, yeah, because they were just curtains. Yes, I recall going to that performance as well.
Well, I think the soloists that we had varied a lot depending on who was doing the conducting, because they would basically bring in their reserves of people that they knew were backlogged.
Leo brought in a lot of vocalists.
Yes.
He loved
Yeah.
opera.
Right.
Yes.
He really was an expert in opera. I mean, he was a very good musician. He knew the orchestral literature, but it's almost like he came alive.
Did you ever play an opera under him?
No.
that was an experience.
Was that in Omaha?
In Omaha.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, he totally forgot that there's an orchestra there. He was on that stage just
Yes.
mesmerized. I mean, you had to really, you were not going to get a cue through the entire opera. So once you hit that downbeat, you're on your own.
Did he still take his pocket watch out and check the time like he
No,
did?
he was.
You always knew when it was.
No, he was
The
into
symphony
it.
was coming to an end because he had to catch his flight
Yes.
back to Chicago before he stopped.
No, the opera was another world for
In
him.
the 40s, it was the train.
The train.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is Leo Kopp.
Leo
Kopp,
that's
Right.
yes.
We mentioned him earlier.
Yes.
Well,
Colorful
then-
character.
well, then
Colorful.
we did like Yellow Bird, the bird,
No, I don't know.
Big Bird.
Big Bird concert.
Oh, yeah, oh,
That was
yes.
Emil.
Yeah.
That was
That's what I was
Emil,
going
yeah.
to say, that then you get to a different
Okay.
conductor and you get a different type thing that's happening.
Well, and Aaron Copeland conducted the
Yeah.
Lincoln Symphony once. I don't know, was that the same concert as
It
Big
might have
Bird?
been. It might have
Centennial
been.
in '76, yeah.
We did a concert with him at the
First
Plymouth
Plymouth,
also.
and Levick played
Yeah.
the organ concerto.
But there was another concert we did with Lincoln.
Right,
I don't remember what it was, other than,
Lincoln's Portrait.
you're
Yeah.
right,
Lincoln Portrait.
You're right.
Cronkite narrating and,
Yes.
Right.
Was it Walter Cronkite?
yes.
right, Copeland conducting. Are we allowed to tell stories?
It was,
That's-
yeah.
That's when Aaron Copeland was starting his second career as a conductor, and he really wasn't a great conductor, but he was starting to have some dimension. And do you guys remember when he got a little bit lost and Cronkite had to tell him where he was because he was giving Aaron the cues? I thought, as a kid, sitting in the back of the orchestra, that was great. That was perfect. So.
Makes you hope that doesn't happen to you.
I certainly do.
Somebody will
bad karma,
warn you.
you know.
Someone will warn you that
That's
it's
right.
time
Rich,
to quit.
it's time. Put the sticks down now.
Well, and Vernon, you retired from the orchestra and from teaching it. What was it that told you it was time to stop playing the trombone in public? It wasn't me. I mean, I thought you
No.
were still sounding okay.
I had a little trouble with the stairway at the School of Music. I was going to my brass class, and I had something in each hand. And evidently I had not taken it into account that there was one more stair before I got to the landing. And I stepped out in, and nothing was there. And I just fell forward into the wall, and it bumped my lip and it bumped my nose. And I thought my nose was the real injury because it needed a stitch. But after a couple of weeks and the kind of bruise on my lip healed, I picked up my trombone, and the strangest noise came out of it. It fluttered, and I thought, what is this? And I thought, well, maybe it needs to heal a little bit more. So I gave it a little more time and practiced a little more, very carefully, and it was still like that. And then for a number of months, well, then I let go of the trombone entirely for a couple of months, thinking like, my lip needs to heal, and we'll get somebody else to play the early concerts. This is my last year of teaching. I graduated. I retired in 96. And so this was 95. And I pick up my trombone and started to practice very carefully and say like January. This happened like in October or something like that. And I would tire in 5 minutes. I'd have to quit playing. And then maybe I could go 10 minutes. And then in March I was thinking, well, maybe I can continue playing in the orchestra. So I picked up some music like I would have to play in the orchestra, with the volume and everything, and the strength and the range. And I played about 10 minutes of that at home, and I realized I can't do it. So I called the symphony office and said, "I'm afraid I have to retire." So it wasn't a decision. I was going to retire when I retired from the university anyway. But so it happened a year early. But it wasn't part of the game plan.
Yeah, I retired from the symphony because I was on the orchestra committee, and the negotiations for the contract were really unpleasant, and nothing was fun anymore.
Yeah.
So,
You played all the literature a number of times for second clarinet.
well, you know, anyway, but so it wasn't fun anymore. And like you said, music, there has to be play involved, and so I just did the honorable thing and ran away.
Well, you had other outlets that were, in a way, filling your life with music. So it wasn't like the Lincoln Symphony was the only option or something like that. You weren't giving up playing or playing music.
Any other embarrassing stories or?
Do you remember how when you were a little kid and you were in the grocery store and you saw your teacher and you couldn't believe, wow, teachers eat? Well, I was on a run-out concert with Vernon and Priscilla Parsons. Years ago, we must have went to Bassett, Nebraska with NCO, and I was in the carpool with Priscilla and Vernon. I don't know if you remember this or not.
No.
And on the way back, both Priscilla and Vernon wanted to stop at this Greasy Spoon and order this big order of onion rings. And I thought, what? These people eat onion rings? Don't they know that's bad for them? You remember that?
I don't
And
remember
you just
that.
relish those things? They're amazing.
But Rich, we were older than you, and we were growing up and had eaten all kinds of meals like this that had all kinds of bad food that nobody thought was bad.
And we
It
just
didn't
put
have,
it in a
you know, and
sandbox.
you grew up
That's
in a
where
time
it was.
when you were learning all of this.
But it was just like, wow, it surprised me. But you sure enjoyed them. I remember
Oh,
that.
yes.
Both you and Priscilla, that was great.
I'll
Great
be
experience.
darned. Bassett, Nebraska.
Remember that?
That was a
Must have
sail
been
barn.
Sail barn,
Yeah.
right? Bach Brandenburg concertos.
In the sail barn.
For heaven's sakes.
They loved it.
How did it smell in there? I mean, if they sell cattle and
Well,
stuff.
you know.
Oh, okay, just curious. I wasn't on that one.
It smelled sort of like hay.
Oh, well, it could have been worse, yeah.
Could have been worse.
What other orchestras have you played in?
Well, Omaha Symphony many years. And
We all played in Omaha, right? You were?
Yes, I played in Omaha.
Omaha Opera Orchestra some.
Mary Finn was the contractor
Oh,
for that.
yes.
Yeah.
Mary Finn, I remember her.
Small but mighty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Little girl playing big timpani.
That was
Mary Finn?
Mary Ann Wampler.
Mary-
That was
That's
Yes.
Wampler. Mary
Yeah,
Finn
right.
played violin.
What was her maiden name?
Wilkinson.
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 M.A. Wilkinson.
I think Mary Finn was the violinist.
Violin.
Yeah, she was a violinist, I believe.
Oh, I'm
Is it
thinking
about-
of somebody else small but mighty who played the timpani.
Yeah.
Yeah.
M.A.
Can anybody think? of
Emmy.
one?
Mary Ann Wilkinson.
Mary Ann Wilkinson.
Oh, I
Mary
got another
David
one.
Wallace.
There's
Different.
another one.
That's the
Oh,
one.
okay.
Different.
Must have been before MA.
And that was
Still
after
living.
I left the Omaha Symphony. So that had to be
Well,
like in
Steve
the
Thomas
70s.
played before M.A. Steve Thomas. So again, you've been around much longer than we have. So I don't know.
I want to go back to a bass player in the symphony. He was a dentist, Doc Ziegenbein.
Doc Ziegenbein. He was a relative of Harry Ziegenbein.
Harry Ziegenbein. He had a fabulous Amati bass, old Italian, rare Italian. He had all kinds of offers from all over the country to buy this. He wouldn't sell it. He was also noted for the fact that he did his own dental work.
Ooh.
Ooh.
He was a dentist in Ashland.
Ashland. There was another Ziegenbein named Barbara who was playing in the Lincoln Symphony a long time ago, too.
Yes.
Really?
She taught in Ashland many years. She didn't play for much longer after. I think she
ran
just.
into her.
Pardon me?
I ran into her shortly after probably 10 years ago now, but
Oh.
I ran into her and she was just out doing her normal things. She said she played at home a little bit.
Aleta, I'd like to ask your opinion about this, because when I was in the symphony under Leo Kopp, and I remember the rehearsal schedule that we had to have, and it started well back in the 40s, and Leo actually was working at the Chicago Lyric Opera.
Yes.
He was a coach there, and he could come for a couple of days. So the symphony rehearsals were scheduled around a time when he could come and maybe do a couple of them in a row and then go back to Chicago. So the rehearsal schedule was like this. First rehearsal was on Sunday night. The second and third rehearsal was on the next week, Sunday and Monday. And the next rehearsal was Sunday, Monday, and the youth concert was on Tuesday morning. After the youth concert, there was a rehearsal, and then Tuesday night was the subscription concert. Well, the first rehearsal, Leo was never there. We had an assistant conductor in town. He was a member of the violin section. His name was Bernard Nevin. He was the orchestra director at Lincoln High. And I recall, this would have been in the 40s. And I recall Bernard having the first rehearsal. And it was very perfunctory. Well, let's see, we don't know how Mr. Kopp is going to take this, but we'll just go on here. Nothing about interpretation was ever handled. It was only notes and rhythms and things like that. Nothing was really accomplished that first. It was almost like sight reading time. And we'd go through the rehearsals, and then we get to the Tuesday night concert. And my impression was, the orchestra played a lot better Tuesday night than any of the rehearsals or anything. It was wonderful. And it was like, we needed all those rehearsals. And the people that we had playing at the time, we had a lot of people that were more or less like part-timers. They were not full-time performers, or they didn't play a lot. And so maybe they needed a little more practice. And my feeling was, the other thing was, that Leo Kopp was not great as a rehearsal conductor. He did not have a good rehearsal technique. He was a marvelous musician. You know, and your experience at the Omaha Opera led you to believe that too, I'm sure. But, and he could really direct the concerts, but we couldn't get things worked out, and we needed all those rehearsals just to kind of learn the thing. And when, of course, when Robert Emile came and started, and his rehearsal technique was marvelous. He fixed things up right away in the first and second, third rehearsals. And we were playing quite well as we approached the concert. We knew we were going to have a good performance, but we weren't assured of it under Leo. Except if you look back and said, well, the other concerts, they went good, so it'll probably go like this.
Yeah, you hope.
Yeah, right.
Life on the edge.
And actually, the reason we got Robert Emile in town is somewhat because of me. Because at that time, there was a lot of criticism of Leo. And Emmanuel was approaching age 65. At that time, the university had a rule. If you're 65, you have to retire. Well, unless the department feels you are essential. And so it was time for Emmanuel to retire, and we were going to get a new orchestra conductor and violin teacher at the university. And I went to both John Moran and I went to the Lincoln Symphony Organization, and I said, look, we can get somebody that's far better than either one of us can afford. if we put the two jobs together. And
John Moran being the chairman of the department, music department.
Right.
Yeah.
And he will be a resident conductor. He will live in town, which is something we hadn't had before. And I thought that would really promote the orchestra's well-being. And so we hired Robert Emile. I was disappointed in some ways with the outcome, but as far as musically, I was very happy with what we could do under Robert Emile.
Yeah, the orchestra season got bigger, more pops concerts, more classical concerts,
Absolutely.
all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
And
Master
a lot
agreement.
of people came to the concerts.
And more players, like from Omaha, were interested in coming up and filling in.
They liked Emile because he knew so much about strings. Whereas at that time, their conductors in Omaha were not quite that conversant.
He also started the string assistant program where they would be graduate assistants and then play in the orchestra as well.
Yes.
Remember that?
Right.
Some really strong players.
Mm-hmm. We had what we called an Eastman connection, because Emile was in Eastman, and actually he was a very outstanding student in Eastman. And he told a story once that Eastman was located in Rochester, New York, and Rochester had a symphony orchestra. And a lot of the teachers at Eastman played in the Rochester Philharmonic, but not all of them. And then Howard Hanson organized another orchestra called the Eastman Rochester Philharmonic, which included more teachers from Eastman and maybe a few less of the townspeople, but a lot of the people from the
Graduate students.
Rochester Orchestra. And they did a lot of recording, and they recorded Hanson's works, of course, a well-known American composer. Nebraska, from Wahoo. And so Howard Hanson was directing the rehearsal, and they were going to record it. And so they decided, Howard decided, this is according to Emile's story, that he wanted to go out in the audience and listen what the balance was and everything like that. But would you direct this run through? So Bud directed the run through, and according to Bud, they recorded that and they decided to keep that one. But the record came out with Howard Hanson conducting.
Oh, of course, yeah. Thank you all very much for joining us here today. We appreciate your insights and memories. It's just been a lot of fun.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's been a great ride, music in Lincoln.
Hey, how about that?
Let's hope it
It's still going
continues.
on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent.
You bet.